Good day. Today I'd like to talk about corn and the different processes of corn. There's parched corn, there's dried corn, and there's popped corn. Now, these are three different, not necessarily three different processes, but they're three different types, obviously. Although they're actually made in a very similar manner. Parched corn, of course, was ground and carried in bags for trial food by both Indians and colonials. Dried corn is good for storing, and if you're carrying a pot and you want to take some dried corn with you to boil, that's good too. Popcorn, again, pretty good. It's light, and you can carry that with you, or you can actually pop it in the camp if you want, or pop it at home and just carry it with you again in a bag. Now, the different processes of doing this, it's probably the best way to explain is that parched corn is like a super dried corn. There is no oil or no grease used in the process in making it, and it can be made in several ways. Parched corn can be placed on a flat rock in a fire until it goes brown, and I'll show you a little later on what you should expect it to look like. It can be done in the ashes of the fire and then sifted out later on. When clay pots became available, Indians would make it in clay pots. Now, two ways of doing it in a clay pot would be to put hot ashes into a clay pot and then put a handful of corn in with the hot ashes in the clay pot and shake it in, move it around and leave it in there to parch. And the other method, which I'll just show you quickly. Now, ideally this pot would be a bit deeper, but this is the only one I've got at the moment, so this will have to do. As I said before, you can put hot ashes into the pot, you can put a handful of corn into the pot, and you can shake it around until the corn is all down into the hot ashes, and you can leave it to parch that way. The other way of doing it is to put the pot into the fire, into the hot ashes at an angle like that. Bank the ashes up around it and on top of it, so the pot's going to get hot from all the hot ashes all around it. Then you can get a handful of corn and throw it in the pot, and just keep your eye on it. Every now and then you can maybe take one out, a kernel out, and see if it's just how hard it is. That's the other thing. A lot of people have said that parched corn should be still soft. Well, to my way of thinking, if it's soft, then it isn't completely dried. And if you're going to grind it, it needs to be completely dry. So that's another thing about parched corn. It is dry and it is hard. That is what I have managed to gain from reading about it. So there it is. That's how to use a pot, by putting the ashes around it and making the pot hot, and putting a handful of corn into the pot where it'll be really hot, and it will parch that way. Okay. Now dried corn, it can be dried on the cob, and that is probably the best way of doing it. That's the way I do it. You take the outer layer, the leafy layer, which is called the shuck, and you gather it up until the corn cob itself is bare, and you've got the shuck sticking up on the top. Now you can either plait this shuck if it's dry enough, or you can put some cordage around it and tie it around it, and then you can hang it onto a line or a wooden beam or a branch or anything in the sun, and just hang it, and that's it, and it just dries. That to me is the easiest way of doing it. If you wanted to cut it off the cob, you could do, and spread it out on a piece of bark, and dry it in the sun that way. But basically that's all there is to that. You're simply drying it until it's hard, and you'll see the difference in a minute between that and the parched corn. Popcorn, as somebody said to me recently, is done exactly the same way as parched corn, only with a different corn, and it doesn't pop, and that's exactly right. Popcorn can be done again on a hot stone, in a fire, a hot flat stone, or you can put it straight into the ashes. If you've got a skillet or an iron pot, you can put it into that and keep shaking it so it doesn't burn until it pops on that. You could put a little bit of fat around it if you're going to put a lid on the top of an iron pot and leave it on the fire. You could put just rub a little fat around on the inside, a little grease, but I wouldn't use too much. You really don't need a lot, and that will pop. When it pops in the ashes, it will literally pop out of the ashes. And the same if it's on a flat rock in the fire, it will jump, it'll pop, it'll come right out of the fireplace, and so you'll have to retrieve the corn as it pops. That's about it. It's all fairly simple, and I'll just show you the three different types. Okay, here we have the three different types. This is the popcorn. Fairly easy to recognise. White, light, fluffy looking. The dried corn, although darker than when it's fresh, is still light. It's still a light colour. But the parched corn is quite dark. And that's the difference to look at. So this is dried out far more than the dried corn. Okay? And that's the popcorn. And all three types are good for carrying on the trail, depending on what it is you actually want to do with them. Obviously the popcorn can be eaten as is. The dried corn would want adding to water to boil it, or in fact adding to, say, a stew or something like that. And the parched corn, of course, can be ground into a flour, and you could either add something with that if you wanted to, and put it in a bag. It just needs some water to add to it. I believe some people used to just put a handful of it into their mouth and take a drink of water and eat it that way, and that makes it easy. But anyway, that's it. That's the three types, and I've explained on how they're actually made. So I'll leave it at that, and perhaps see you down the trail sometime.